Anda. Acara webinar akan segera dimulai. Untuk kenyamanan Anda, perhatikan informasi sebagai berikut. Please make sure your internet connection is stable. Pastikan koneksi internet Anda dalam keadaan stabil. Make sure you click Join Audio on Zoom to be able to hear the speaker's voice on this webinar. Pastikan Anda sudah join audio pada Zoom untuk dapat mendengarkan suara pembicara pada webinar ini. This webinar is facilitated with simultaneous translator English Bahasa that can be accessed through feature interpretation. Webinar ini difasilitasi penerjemah simultan dalam English dan Bahasa yang dapat diakses melalui fitur interpretation. For your convenience, please use headset or earphones. Untuk kenyamanan Anda, silakan menggunakan headset atau earphones. Klik Q&A feature and use the question format, full name, address speaker, question. Klik fitur Q&A dan gunakan format pertanyaan, nama lengkap, narasumber yang dituju, pertanyaan. Please kindly fill in the survey and download today's webinar presentation with the link shown on the screen. Bapak Ibu hadirin sekalian, mohon untuk dapat mengisi survei pada link yang muncul pada layar Bapak Ibu dan link materi akan diberikan kepada peserta yang telah mengisi survei tersebut pada akhir acara. Terima kasih.
Assalamualaikum, selamat siang. Pak Lutfi.
Waalaikumsalam, selamat siang semuanya.
Pak Lutfi kayaknya masih mute deh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The Honorable Chairman of the Board of Commissioners of the Financial Services Authority, Mr. Mahendra Siregar. We would like to welcome Member of the Board of Commissioners of the Financial Services Authority, Mr. Inarno Jayadi, Ms. Sofia Watimena, and Ms. Friderica Widyasari Dewi. Director General of Climate Change Control, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Republic of Indonesia, Ms. Laksmi Dewanti. Officers in ministry and state institutions. All speakers, Director of Sectoral and Regional Resources Mobilization, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Republic of Indonesia, Mr. Wahyu Marjaka. We also would like to welcome Executive Director of Markets from Abu Dhabi Global Market Financial Services Regulatory Authority, Mr. Simon O'Brien. Business Development Environmental Markets European Energy Exchange, Mr. Ingmar Rovekamp. Commissioners and Directors of Self-Regulatory Organization, Capital Market Journalists, and all other invited guests who have joined virtually in this event. Good day and welcome to International Seminar Carbon Trading, the Journey to Net Zero. Ladies and gentlemen, to start today's event, welcoming speech by Director General of Climate Change Control, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Republic of Indonesia. We welcome Ms. Laksmi Dewanti.
I thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May the peace, mercy, and blessing of Allah be upon us. Excellency, Chairman of the Board of Commissioners of the Financial Services Authority, Bapak Mahendra Siregar, distinguished members of the Board of Commissioners OJK, distinguished Deputy Commissioners, Head of Departments, Head of Regional Offices of OJK, distinguished resource person, speakers, moderator, participants, ladies and gentlemen. A very good afternoon. First of all, let us express our praise and gratitude to the God Almighty that today we gather here virtually in the international seminars, Carbon Trading, the Journey to Net Zero Emissions, which was held to commemorate 45 years of the reactivations of the Indonesia capital market. To begin with, let me convey a sincere regard from the Minister of Environment and Forestry, Madam Siti Nurbaya. And in this important occasions, I'm assigned by Her Excellency, the Minister Siti Nurbaya, to deliver a speech at this important event. I would like to express our appreciations to ladies and gentlemen, the audience who attended the jointly participated in this important event. I also would like to express our sincere gratitude to the Financial Service Authority in collaboration with the self-regulatory organizations in organizing these important international seminars. It is my pleasure to be here to join this forum and to brief you Indonesian policy and regulations with regard to the climate change as well as carbon pricing related implementation in Indonesia. Excellencies and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in a national context, back in 2016, Indonesia has set a commitment target for reducing national greenhouse gas emissions in the nationally determined contributions or NDC of 29% with national effort and targeting emission reduction of 41% with international assistance compared to business as usual with baseline by 2030, which will be achieved through 5 important sectors: the forestry sector, energy, including transportations, waste sector, industrial process and product use, and agriculture. To implement NDC at the national level, Indonesia is also developed so-called the long-term strategy for low carbon and climate resilience 2050, or LTS-LCCR, as a guide for implementing climate change mitigation and adaptations actions to achieve net zero emission by 2060 or sooner. So through this LTS-LCCR document, Indonesia emphasized the achievement of net zero emission by 2060 or sooner. So following the COP26 of UNFCCC last year, 2021, as well as to comply with decisions number 1 CMA3 in the Glasgow, especially paragraph 29, which mandates that each country be asked to increase its NDC target in an effort to align with the scenario of preventing a global temperature increase of no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. An Indonesian's enhanced NDC document has been just submitted to the UNFCCC a couple days ago in September 23rd to reflect raising ambitions by increasing emission reduction target from 29% in our first and updated NDC to 31.89% unconditionally, and from 41% in the first and updated NDCs to 43.20% conditionally. So this enhanced NDC is the transitions toward Indonesia's second NDC, which will be aligned with the long-term low carbon and climate resilience strategy 2050, as I mentioned, with a vision to achieve net zero emission by 2060 or sooner. So moreover, the enhanced MBC is also provide updates on to reflect the current national context, clear milestone along with the national development for the period 2020 to 2024. To achieve the NDC target, Indonesia has issued regulations of the Presidential Decree number 96 of 2021, the implementations of carbon pricing to achieve nationally determined contribution target and to control over greenhouse gas emission in the national development. The regulation is highlighting on how carbon pricing can be carried out through mechanisms of carbon trading, including cap and trade, between two business actors, or emission offset or carbon offset in the form of effort to absorb carbon in amount of emissions they produce, result-based payment, levy on carbon, and combination of the existing carbon pricing mechanisms. On these occasions, we are hoping that we could learn more about the mechanism, especially the carbon trading mechanism, which will be implemented through direct trading or through the carbon exchange, as well as to share experiences with international institutions and organizations that have successfully implemented the mechanism. Excellencies and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, carbon pricing will be one of the instruments to reduce greenhouse gas emission in Indonesia. In addition, the carbon pricing is envisioned to be a mechanism that makes climate change adaptations and mitigation action more effective, efficient, inclusive, transparent, accountable, and fair. The implementers of the carbon pricing implementations are related ministries, agencies, local government, business actors, and the community in accordance with the NDC roadmap. NDC adjustment per sector, emission limits, to the development of science, technology, and sector capacity. Carbon trading as one of the carbon pricing mechanism is a market-based mechanism to reduce greenhouse gas emission through buying and selling of carbon units. Carbon trading can be carried out domestically or abroad, and the implementation of carbon pricing can also be carried out directly between parties or through the carbon exchange. With the existence of carbon trading, it is hoped that the successful national and global climate policies and actions. Let me quote President Joko Widodo's speech in the Indonesian national statement during the opening session of high-level segment of the COP26 UNFCCC back in November last year, that carbon market and carbon pricing must be part of the effort to address climate change issue. A carbon economy ecosystem that is transparent and has integrity, inclusive, and fair must be created. So along with the Bapak Presiden Joko Widodo statement, the government of Indonesia is developing as well as implementing various regulations and instruments to ensure that a carbon economy ecosystem that we're gonna to have in Indonesia will be transparent, integrity, inclusive, and fair. So this thing is, ladies and gentlemen, toward the end of our remarks, I would like to reiterate the Indonesian commitments to achieving the NDC target, including the implementations of carbon pricing, one of which is carbon trading. The imbalanced effort of its implementations may risk us not achieving the goals to tackle the climate change. Upon that note, I wish that today event with various topics and interesting discussion could bring us toward stronger cooperations between stakeholders in ensuring the effective implementation of carbon trading to be able to achieve our NDC target and our vision toward net zero emission. I thank you and wish all the best. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Ms. Laxmi. Next agenda, keynote speech by Chairman of the Board of Commissioners of the Financial Services Authority. Please welcome Mr. Mahendra Siregar.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good afternoon to all of us. Ibu Laxmi Dewanti, my very good friend, Director General of Climate Change Control. Dear speakers, moderator, participants of this international seminar, first of all, I wish to take this opportunity to extend my gratitude to our colleagues from the self-regulatory organizations, the Indonesia Stock Exchange, Indonesian Clearing and Guarantee Corporation, the Indonesia Central Securities Depository, and my colleagues from the OJK for making this international seminar possible to celebrate the 45th anniversary of the reactivation of the Indonesian capital market. The theme of carbon trading, the journey to net zero, is increasingly a leitmotif of the policies being adopted by many of our trading partners. And Indonesia is in many respects at the forefront of meeting our international commitments for carbon emission reductions. OJK strongly support the efforts being made by our government, and we should be proud that Indonesia is meeting and is likely to exceed the targets laid down in the Paris Agreement for CO2 emission reduction within the time frame of 2030. This is even more significant when we consider that a number of the developed nations who are ostensibly at the forefront of combating climate change are falling behind on their own commitments. The success of Indonesia has been largely attributable to an ability to put forward plans that are practical and readily implemented on the ground. While we may express concern on the progress being made by several of our trading partners, our progress continues, and we should be ready to further accelerate the efforts of achieving sustainability, particularly within the framework of the SDGs 2030, which is of key importance to emerging and developing economies such as Indonesia, namely the crucial need to balance the environment with economic and social progress. Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, one of the key elements in the process of addressing climate change is the speed of the transition from a fossil-based economy to renewable energy. While renewable energies such as solar, wind, geothermal, or even hydro represent key energy mixes in the future, at present, they are not able to replace energy generated from fossil fuels, which remains a fundamental prerequisite for industrial and economic growth sustainably. In this respect, there is a growing concern that some countries in other parts of the world are entering into a deindustrialization phase without having a renewable energy infrastructure to support what is widely termed the green agenda. While this situation is made worse by the geopolitical forces, nevertheless, the growing reality of the deindustrialization is reopening fossil fuels alternative within these countries, in spite of commitments made by the countries concerned. While Indonesia strives to balance out protecting the environment with economic and social progress, it appears that in some countries, the process of sacrificing their economic and social fabric for a green agenda become a realization of which is in doubt. In contrast, a number of our neighbors are adopting more realistic policies to ensure that the transition process is gradual and less disruptive. And it is likely that this approach will be followed by all nations in due course. In this respect, it is important to strive towards sustainability within reasonable, manageable, and realistic timeframes. The importance is that all nations embrace this journey. All participants, ladies and gentlemen, on the future progress in Indonesia, while OJK main role is supervisory in the financial field, we also have a key role to play in supporting the government by helping in shaping the financial system to support Indonesia's progress in reducing CO2 emissions. Amongst others, we are in the reviewing process of contributing to developing benchmarks for sustainability standards within different economic and industrial sectors in order to lay the grounds for the promotion of green financing. Overall, it is important that the Indonesian private sector be an integral part of the efforts being made by the government. And OJK is committed to developing initiatives and instruments to meet that purpose. As one of the government's policy tools, carbon pricing is crucial in tackling climate change as it provides both an incentive to reduce emissions and disincentify to those producing more than the tolerated limit. As of April 2022, 68 carbon pricing instruments, including carbon taxes and emission trading schemes, have been globally developed, although with still low coverage. This is where Indonesia can step up and use the advantage as a leader to use the carbon market initiative to provide alternative financing for the real sector. Indonesia has great potential to lead in this area. With the third largest tropical forest in the world, covering an area of 125 million hectares, Indonesia is estimated to be able to absorb 25 billion tons of carbon. This does not include mangroves and peat forests with even greater carbon absorption potential. Based on these figures alone, Indonesia could generate as much as $565 billion worth of income from carbon trading. The government has enacted the Presidential Decree 98 in 2021 concerning the carbon economic value that sets the implementation of carbon pricing through several mechanisms, one of which is carbon trading through a carbon market. For this initiative to gain momentum, we will get a clear regulatory framework for the authority and operation of a carbon market from the coming Omnibus Law on Financial Services and other regulations that are already in place, both for domestic and foreign trade. We should also lay down primary, secondary, and market infrastructures to be able to support the operation of the carbon market. Furthermore, it is essential to prepare a suitable supervisory mechanism for the carbon market to ensure its alignment with the national targets set in the NDCs. The Indonesian financial services industry is ready to support the initiative. Despite the pressures from the global economic slowdown and high inflation, our financial sector has been resilient, supported by growing intermediation, sufficient liquidity, and strong capital. Our capital market also remains solid with increasing fundraising and the number of investors that has surpassed 9 million, almost threefold compared to the 2020 figure. Dear participants, colleagues, we must join hands to support the government's efforts to mitigate and adapt to climate change. The carbon trade initiative, be it done directly or through carbon market, is in line with the spirit to transition into sustainability. Nonetheless, our commitment to a greener economy must be compatible with the interests of our nation to ensure that all can prosper from this policy. I would like to appreciate and keep encouraging synergy between the government, the SROs, OJK, and business players, as our cooperation is very key to the success of this initiative. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Mahendra Siregar. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand by because we are going to have a photo session together. Please position yourself in front of the camera. For the first session, we're going to have the member of the Board of Commissioners of the Financial Services Authority and the directors of self-regulatory organization to be taken a picture first. Please position yourself and give your best smile. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. For the next session, we're going to have another photo session with all the audiences. Please open your camera. We're going to have a photo session. Okay, 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. In a few moments, we are going to move forward to the main agenda, which is the seminar. The seminar today will be moderated by Head of Business Development of Indonesia Stock Exchange. Please welcome Mr. Ignatius Denny Wicaksono.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. Very good afternoon all of the audiences. Welcome to discussion session of International Seminar on Carbon Trade 2022, Carbon Trading, the Journey to Net Zero. I'm Ignatius Denny Wicaksono and I will be your moderator in this discussion for around 2 hours until 4 p.m. Jakarta time. As we have known, climate action failure has been identified as the most severe risk on a global scale over the next 10 years, according to World Economic Forum. Responding to that, many parties, both from governments and non-government, including capital market, are decided to act to mitigate that risk. Paris Agreement, one of the major milestones in human history, brings all nations into a common cause to undertake ambitious effort to combat climate change. The aim of Paris Agreement on climate change is to hold the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and pursuing effort to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by the end of the century. It means that the world requires net zero CO2 emission around 2050. Most of the countries have set their ambitious target of nationally determined contribution and also commit to net zero, including Indonesia. Bu Laksmi already mentioned that Indonesia aimed to reduce NDC with unconditionally target increase from 29% to 31%, and increase also for conditionally emission reduction target from 41% to 43% in 2030, and expect to have net zero in 2060 or sooner. Carbon pricing will become one of the tools to regulate the internalization and reduce the greenhouse gas emission. Thus, carbon market plays an important part in it. In capital market, all listed companies and financial institutions are obliged to calculate their greenhouse gas emission and also disclose their effort to reduce emission. Many companies also voluntarily committed to become carbon neutral or net zero to support this movement. So that's why the presence of the carbon trading plays a vital role to support this movement. Today, in today's seminar, we will gain insight about carbon market development, mechanism, and global practice of carbon trading, including Indonesia's strategy to implement carbon trading. Together with us in this session, we have three prominent persons that represent three different institutions that play central role in carbon market both in Indonesia and globally. They will share a very interesting topic in their respective country. Together with us today, first from Jakarta, Indonesia, we have Bapak Wahyu Marjaka. Good afternoon, Pak Wahyu.
Good afternoon, Pak Denny Wicaksono.
How are you, Pak?
Very fine, Pak. Thank you very much.
Very nice having you here with us today, Pak. Pak Wahyu Marjaka is Director of Sectoral and Regional Resource Mobilization at Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Republic of Indonesia. Pak Wahyu is one of the main person in charge in developing carbon pricing in Indonesia. Allow me to read a short bio of Pak Wahyu. Pak Wahyu Marjaka is Director of Sectoral and Regional Resource Mobilization, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Republic of Indonesia since February 2018. Pak Wahyu has doctoral degree from Tokyo Institute of Technology, Bioengineering, Master of Engineering degree also from Tokyo Institute of Technology, Bioengineering, and Bachelor degree of Environmental Biology from University of Gajah Mada. And after that, from Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, we have Mr. Simon O'Brien. Hi, Mr. Simon.
Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. How are you?
We are great. Good morning, Mr. Simon. Glad to have you today with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you again, and pleasure to meet everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Mr. Simon O'Brien is Executive Director of Markets, Abu Dhabi Global Markets, Financial Services Regulatory Authority. Allow me to read a short bio of Simon. Simon joined the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Abu Dhabi Global Market in September 2015. He leads the Markets Department, which is responsible for the authorization and supervision of market infrastructures and organized trading facilities, the FSRA Listing Authority, and FSRA Market Surveillance. Simon has a Bachelor of Economics and a postgraduate diploma of Applied Economics from the University of Queensland, as well as graduate diploma of Applied Finance and Investment from Vincia, Australia. Last but not least, from Abu Dhabi, we will move to Leipzig, Germany. We have Mr. Ingmar Ruvekam. Also, good morning to you, Ingmar. Hello, Ingmar. Happy to see you today.
Yeah, hello there. Many thanks for having me here. It's really an honor to be part of this seminar, and I'm very much looking forward to the different presentations.
Thank you, thank you. Very good to see you here, Ingmar. Mr. Ingmar Ruvekam is Business Development in EEX Environmental Markets, while European Union Emission Trading System is the largest ETS market in the world, and we are very lucky having Mr. Ingmar with us today. Allow me to read a short bio of Mr. Ingmar. Mr. Ingmar Ruvekam joined the European Energy Exchange, EEX, in November 2019. Currently, he is Business Development in EEX Environmental Markets, focusing on international compliance carbon markets, national German fuel ETS. Ingmar has a PhD of Economics from TU Dresden. So I will divide the today's session into two parts. The first will be the short presentation, around 20 minutes, for each of the panelists. The second part will be panel discussion and Q&A sessions, around 40 to 50 minutes for all the audiences. And before the end of the discussion session, I will invite all the panelists to give a closing remarks for the audience. I invite all of the audience to write question via Q&A box in Zoom platform. Please write your name, institution, your question, and to whom you address your questions. The selected question will be addressed to the speakers, depend on the time limit and duration. If you have any question, just write it. You don't need to wait until all the panelists present their material. So, without further ado, I would like to start the first part, which is 20 minutes short presentation. I will invite the first speaker, Bapak Wahyu Marjaka. Bapak Wahyu will share about Indonesia implementation of carbon pricing and strategy to achieve NDC, including the plan of organizing carbon trading. Pak Wahyu, 20 minutes presentation. The screen is yours, Pak.
Thank you very much, Pak Denny Wicaksono, Excellency Chairman of Finance Service Authority, His Excellency Bapak Mahendra Siregar, Excellency Board of Director Finance Service Authority, distinguished resource persons, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I would like to thank to OJK that's already invited me in the very good seminar, international seminar. And this occasion, I would like to present the updated situation regarding the nilai ekonomi karbon in Indonesia, all carbon pricing in Indonesia. So could you please to share my presentation? Thank you very much again. Next, please. Yeah, Indonesia, as we understand that one of the country in the global community have highly vulnerable to climate change with more than 70,000 islands. That's very vulnerable to climate change risk. And also from our measurement between 2010 to 2018, the trend of Indonesian national greenhouse emission increases around 4.3% annually. So this is a very serious condition of Indonesia. On the other hand, we have already some indication and fact on the ground regarding the climate change risk that including water scarcity, where we have more flood and drought in some areas in Indonesia. And also a loss of ecosystem, biodiversity, we measure using the data, damaged land ecosystem and damaged marine ecosystem, and some of the damaged ecosystem have impact to the health quality. We measure some, we found some outbreak of disease through factors and death from drowning, rising temperatures, impact caused by death from heat waves. And also, in some part of Indonesia, we have a food scarcity. This climate change may increase the risk of hydrometeorological disaster that now account for around 80%. Next, please. Concerning to the situation, impact of climate change, our President, His Excellency Bapak Presiden Joko Widodo, has pledged the commitment to the global on COP21 Paris 2015, and followed by the Minister of Environment and Forestry, His Excellency Ibu Siti Nurbaya, to sign this in the high-level signature ceremony on the Paris Agreement in New York 2016, and follows also the legislation or ratification of the Paris Agreement using a law number 16/2016. From the 2016, as follow, we have some milestone here. Indonesia more committed, stronger by submitted the first NDC, and followed by the NDC roadmap 2019 and 20. And last year, we submitted to UNFCCC document LTS LCCR 2050, and also updated NDC in the same months. After that, this last year, on the October, 2 days before President go to COP26 in the Glasgow, President has signed up the Presidential Regulation number 98, 2021. And I take a quote of Indonesian President that Indonesia will be able to contribute more quickly to the world net zero emission. This is very important milestone that bring us to higher and commitment to the emission reduction in the global level. And just a few days ago, we, against Indonesia, submitted to UNFCCC, we call it enhanced NDC document. So this is the milestone figure out our commitment to the global. Next, please. And based on this commitment, national determined contribution with the goal of supporting greenhouse gas reduction to 29% and up to 41% with the international support by 2030, and also increases national climate resilience, we developed two cluster action. Yes, the first one, a mitigation action, and the second one, adaptation action, with the all data and target goal that we have to achieve to complete our commitment. And this milestone, of course, bring us to achieve the long-term strategy for low carbon and resilient climate resilient. And this proposes toward to achieve the net zero emission by 2060 or sooner. A few days ago, again, we submitted enhanced NDC on the 23rd September 22. This number already revised and enhanced from 29% to become 31% and up to 43% from business as usual. This is a very good position, a very good claim to our from enhanced NDC that's already submitted to UNFCCC. Next, please. This table, actually, I just inform you that the targets already corrected and improved to become 29% to become 31%, up to 43% by years to 22 a few days ago. And of course, the data will be corrected and can be downloaded, and the document that's already submitted to UNFCCC. Next, please. Of course, Indonesian government are very serious to face this climate change. Of course, this consideration also bring us to focus and prepare all activities and strategies to get the support to financial requirement to achieve targets of NDC by 2030. In this data, actually, we can get from the data from biannual update report 2018 that this calculated a quantified budget actually should be calculated based on the first NDC and will be recalculated according to enhanced NDC this year. Next, please. To get the stronger financial support, of course, we mobilize three kinds of element resource support. The first one is financing support. The second one is capacity building support. And the third one, technology transfers and technology development support. This, of course, will support our state budget, our own financing, and also international financing. This financing scheme actually including the carbon pricing mechanism and also non-carbon pricing mechanism. In this regard, we also implement the mandate from the Presidential Decree number 98 by years to 2021, that some derivative of carbon pricing regulation that are still in discussion, and hopefully we can have one or two ministerial regulation in very soon, in the few days forward. Next, please. Based on this mechanism, actually, we developed in the Presidential Decree number 98 used to achieve the target of Indonesian NDC. We developed some derivative regulation in the ministerial level. And in this regard, we developed four carbon pricing administration. First one is a carbon trading. The second one is a carbon levy. The third one is performance-based financing. And the fourth are the suitable mechanism following the development of science and technology as regulated by the minister. For the carbon trading, we have two kinds of emission trading, and the other one is emission offset. This can be done cross-sectoral and in the country or with a foreign country through a carbon market mechanism. This is why we put this information to and communicate with the OJK at the carbon exchange in Jakarta and direct trading. For carbon levy, there is some information. This is included one of the important things, this carbon tax. However, to discuss the carbon tax is the PIC for the carbon tax is belong to Ministry of Finance of Indonesia. Next, please. The one very important thing on implementation of carbon pricing, we have the question is where is the carbon price will be implemented and to whom will implement the carbon pricing. And this is sectors, of course, and this is subsectors. It is target or object will be implemented to carbon pricing, and the in charge institution is a ministry or institution, and local government and business sector, of course, including the public sectors. To implement the carbon pricing, of course, we have to some reference and guidance. The first one is NDC roadmap. The second one is strategy for achieving NDC targets in the sector. And the third, greenhouse gas emission cap. Time effectiveness and cost efficiency, and the fifth is development of science, technology, and capacity of sector. While we're implementing this mechanism, of course, we will follow the step by step, including the registration to SRN, in order to get the target emission reduction defined in the NDC. And the second one is a certificate of greenhouse gas emission reduction. We call it Indonesian certificate emission reduction. This is a unit to implement in the carbon market or carbon trading. Next, please. To get the NDC target, to achieve NDC targets and the carbon pricing, of course, there are two flows. The first one, a proponent should be report mitigation action achievement by their own activity, by their own, the action. The second one is proponent report the emission level or greenhouse gas inventory. The first flow should be reporting in the emission reduction reporting system for a sector, then integrated to the system integration to SRN. The second one, proponent report the emission level, go to greenhouse inventory reporting system for sector, and flows to the sign marks, and both a system of actually integrated to, we call it Indonesia backbone for the carbon pricing and achievement of NDC. We call it as a national registry system, or SRN PPI. And then from this, we can divide it into where we need to achieve the NDC. We calculated the carbon unit level, and also from this SRN, we go to SRN carbon registry system, and then we can follow to SPE, then follow to the carbon pricing or carbon stock exchange. Next, please. Actually, from the previous slide, we understand that this is the mechanism that cannot be separated between carbon market and SRN PPI, or national registry system. The everything action should be registered in the SRN PPI, and this is used to be an indicator, to be a failure that carbon market will be running. And for the carbon market, it should be integrated to SRN PPI, and whereas the carbon trading is not integrated to SRN PPI, yet carbon trade ruled by the General Carbon Trading, which is regulated by the ministry. And the SRN PPI also, this is containing the series number and reporting national data, sector and subsector, and jurisdiction related to the quality assurance of greenhouse gas emission reduction. And the most important thing is data used in the carbon. This SRN PPI used in the carbon trading. Next, please. This is also, we call it SER, Certified Emission Reduction, or in Indonesia we call it Sertifikat Pengurangan Emisi GRK. there are four important elements, very important thing to identify, to value the SPE itself. The first is the issuance stage. All activities should be registered at SR and PPI, and validation and verification by the independent should be conducted. And because of that, SPE publishing can be done. This assignment, this activity and responsible is a ministry assigned the Director General to carry out the function of controlling climate change. The second one is the important thing is greenhouse gas emission certification recognition. This is should be conducted by international standard like ISO 14064 and 40065. This is one of the LVV using to recognize and to certify the greenhouse emission. The third one is utility. This is SBE included some of the basis for carbon label to serve as a basis to providing information to customer, supply chain, and as well as a sustainability report and information instrument. And the other application is the label system. This is for branding the stakeholder if we need the reputation of this using SPP. Next, please. On this slide, I can figure out generally the pattern or the path that we achieve, that we run carbon pricing in Indonesia, related also with international, maybe it's possible. Start from last year, we already established government regulation number 7 by years to 2021 regarding tax regulation as a stated carbon tax. And we also already established the presidential regulation number 98 2021 regarding carbon pricing, and the development of carbon pricing mechanism of the subsector of power plant ministry in the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. This year, we going progress with Ministry of Finance regulation regarding cap and tax. This is already also in progress. And also implementation of carbon tax based on implementation cap and tax on the subsector of coal power plant. This is also on ongoing progress, and some of ministerial regulation level derived from presidential decree by years 2021 number 98, and from this year to 2025 we have to identify what the detailed step by step that will be developed yearly from this year to next year and until 2025. Hopefully, with this guidance or milestone, we can develop and discuss regarding the development of carbon pricing in Indonesia. Thank you very much. This the updated situation of the carbon pricing regulation in Indonesia. Again, thank you for your participation, and back to moderator Pak Denny. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Wahyu. Very exciting presentation, Pak, and give us and all the audience a clear point of view on what we face and what Indonesia will do to combat the climate change. There are already so many questions, Pak, but we will address it in the second round, Pak. And for the recap, Pak Wahyu just shared with us about first that the main point that Indonesia is also vulnerable to the climate change impact, and also he shared about the Indonesia NDC roadmap and strategy, and even the enhanced NDC to increase the ambition. Third, the carbon trading for both emission trading and also the potential of the offset, including the Indonesia certification reduction. And last, the milestone and implementation plan of carbon pricing in Indonesia. Thank you, Pak Wahyu. We pray that all the plan will go smoothly, Pak. All right. From Jakarta, we will move to Abu Dhabi. Please welcome Mr. Simon O'Brien. Simon will share the
Good morning from Abu Dhabi and good afternoon into Jakarta in Indonesia. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll jump straight into the slides and I'll talk through them from there. While we're waiting for the slides to come up, I'll just introduce myself further. So I do lead the markets division. I thought the last presentation was extremely beneficial and the earlier presentations from the Director General and others as well. So I'll go through the slides here. Welcome, as I said, from Abu Dhabi. I am the head of the markets division, so I regulate the exchanges and the clearing houses and other products in ADGM as well. And my presentation today will very much focus on the financial regulation aspects of how we build out and regulate these markets going forward. Next slide, please. I'll cover 4 key areas. So I'll take a little bit of time to introduce Abu Dhabi and Abu Dhabi Global Market, being the jurisdiction of which I regulate. We'll talk a little bit around the Sustainable Development Goals and UAE's efforts in terms of supporting the global activities in terms of sustainable goals and what else is happening as well. Then I'll touch on the how to establish a regulatory framework to regulate environmental instruments, which will include carbon offsets, and then talk through a couple of the individual regulatory requirements that may be of relevance to the audience today. Next slide, please. So what is Abu Dhabi Global Market? I put this slide up there thinking that most of the audience would probably think this is what Abu Dhabi Global Market would look like, a picture of the desert. But if you go to the next slide. Next slide, please. It actually looks like this. So a little bit different from the picture of a desert. It's on the water. We are a financial district as well. That building there with the Emirati flag is the building of which the regulator will sit in, and we regulate all the firms inside our jurisdiction. Next slide. This is just to give some background on the establishment of the regime for those panelists, and I'll let the curators of today share the slides. You're welcome to read the slides. But if you see at the bottom screen there's a diagram, a picture, a map, if you say, that's actually the island of which we regulate. So we construct the laws and regulations in our jurisdiction, and we establish it in that sense. That's right down the bottom there. Next slide, please. A couple of key parts to the regulatory regime itself. We have 3 authorities. We have our own standalone courts, common law courts, where the judges can opine and make decisions 24 hours a day. In that red bar, the Financial Services Regulatory Authority, that's the organisation of which I'm in, of which we regulate all financial services activity. And all other firms on the centre would also get authorised as well, so from bakeries to restaurants and others as well. Next slide, please. This slide's not as interesting, but I raise it in the context of financial services. These are the types of rule books and regulations which we regulate. So the normal AML type requirements, prudential requirements, funds, market infrastructures and markets as well. And I raise that because the body of what I'll discuss today is not that different, but it's built on the normal requirements of how we would regulate markets within a jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So this diagram, I'm sure many of you have seen, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and a lot of the context of which we're talking about today is in support of that, or at least the UAE's efforts to support those Sustainable Development Goals. I won't touch on those. I'm sure many of the room are much more well-versed over how these goals would operate. Next slide, please. So we support the development goals in several ways, and we talk about a general obligation around sustainable finance, and we have within the UAE a working group which is constructed from a number of ministries, both federal and emirate level ministries, regulators, the markets themselves, and that's chaired by ADGM, which is where I'm located. So we are a key player in the development of the UAE national developments for sustainable finance. We're trying to ensure there are worthy projects that get the financing needs they need, and of course it focuses on the beneficial, environmentally responsible and economic viable aspects of the project as well. We, at the end of last year, issued a high-level statement supporting these principles. It advances our national net zero 2050 ambition and establishing many requirements around how we can support and develop a sustainable economy. Next slide, please. We talk about the circular economy in the UAE, and that's for different reasons and different areas. We're focused on a number of aspects. But for example, as part of the circular economy and part of trying to support sustainable finance initiatives, we are the first country in the Middle East to operate a zero carbon nuclear power plant. It's a key component of our energy strategy 2050, which links into the Sustainable Development Goals and links into our wider sustainable finance initiatives as well. Under that requirement, we've developed 22 policies aimed at accelerating that circular economy, and there's a number of areas of focus. So one is lowering resource extraction, reducing waste, and restoring the environment as well. I'll go to the next slide, please. So there's four main pillars of which ADGM and the regulator can be involved in this process. And I'm going to focus on the third one here, but there are four altogether. And that's cooperation both nationally and internationally. Obviously bringing awareness to the market and the wider development of the ecosystem. But what I want to talk about today is particularly how we regulate and how we build out a regulatory framework in this space. Next slide. So how we do that. And I like this diagram because it's referencing a bit of a balance. There's obviously competing objectives, trying to find a way to work with the industry. And I really like that slide and I thought I'd share that today, but we might go to the next slide. So our goals for a carbon or environmental instrument framework. And there's a couple of key principles to do that. The first one is to make sure it's safe and sound. And the next key words, without unnecessary over-regulation. Regulators sometimes will, the industry will have a view that regulators will try to impose significant burdens or over-regulate a market, and that's something we've really tried to put in place in our regime. A best-in-class framework with a high level, a high watermark in terms of how we would regulate environmental instruments. Now, I'm using a couple of words here, which I'll go into more detail later on, but just remember that term environmental instrument, and I'll talk about it a little bit further. And that includes carbon markets and addressing the risks, in those markets. We want proper governance and oversight and transparency in those markets. We're going to be continuing to update our rulebook and our requirements, but particularly around putting out new guidance in this area as well. We want to ensure that we have the right players operating in the market, and we ultimately want to make sure by way of the framework, we are seen as a destination of choice for market operators and participants in such markets. Next slide, please. So where did we start? How do we do that? And I noticed one of the questions before was, that was in the chat as to whether something is a commodity or a security and others, and it's a really good question. And we did think of all those. Do we need to define these products as commodities? What sort of instrument are they? How do we have derivatives over them? And at the bottom of the slide, you'll see a couple of points. How we did this in Abu Dhabi is we defined a new financial instrument. So it has the same standing as other things such as securities, derivatives, which include shares, debentures, and the like. And we created the financial instrument and we called it an environmental instrument. So that now is a fully regulated instrument that can be used by brokers and exchanges and clearinghouses inside ADGM. Importantly, we also set up a set of further rules that regulate the trading of accepted spot commodities. So traditionally, markets and regulators have regulated the derivative side. So you might run an oil contract or a carbon derivative contract. We've now created a regime where we both regulate the spot trading of it, but also made sure it's actually an instrument that can be regulated as well. So we've extended our perimeter and we've brought both these concepts of environmental instruments, which can also be classified as spot commodities, to be allowed to be used by regulated firms inside Abu Dhabi. Next slide, please. So this slide won't be all that different to what you'll see regulators providing around the world, but you'll see on the left-hand side, financial instruments, derivatives and securities, as I said, but we can also regulate on the bottom left of the screen, environmental instruments, and we can regulate spot commodities. So if you're looking at things like an oil contract rather than being purely a derivative contract, and there are other assets as well. And this is a key part of what we as a financial services regulator have brought to make sure that we give certainty and clarity to the market. Next slide, please. Financial instruments and environmental instruments. Now, as I said, we've widened the definition of what those instruments are, and we've made sure that we've included a number of aspects in relation to what that instrument is actually defined as. Now, first of all, we require, there's three parts to the definition of an environmental instrument. The first one is it enables its holder to emit greenhouse gases into the atmosphere in accordance with any emissions trading scheme. So what that's doing is that's capturing either a national or an international cap and trade scheme, an ETS in other terms as well. The second part of the definition is to attract or allow for instruments that attest to the reduction or removal of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So this is commonly termed carbon credits or carbon offsets or other similar type product as well. And finally, we have allowed for instruments that attest to the environmental attributes of an underlying unit. These are often called renewable energy certificates or other similar certificates or contracts as well. Now, importantly in that means then, just to reaffirm, we're allowing for both types of activities, a national cap and trade scheme and voluntary carbon markets or voluntary offset markets. When we started the journey, we were very much focused on the ETS side, and we've made sure we can bring in both types of market activities into the centre. Next slide, please. Now, to do this, we're focused on 5 key areas. Regulators, as you know, will try to look at ensuring there are mitigations to cover the risks that operate in such a market. And there's 5 key areas, but these are not the only areas of which we would look to and are seeking to regulate. The first one is obviously in relation to the AML, the money laundering side, the counterterrorism side, and the tax implications of such products. The second one, and a really important one, and I really, again, as I said, like the presentation earlier, that really looked at things around sustainable sourcing, responsible sourcing of product, the carbon markets and commodity markets in general, and that is a key part of our regime. The third one, and a particularly interesting one, is around delivery and storage of such products. So in the carbon offset markets, you have things like carbon warehouses and others as well, and our firms have requirements around how they will onboard and connect to such warehouses and appropriate delivery as well. Importantly, in that aspect, which I'll touch on later, we also have requirements around when settlement is failed, when delivery can't occur, when delivery might occur at a later stage. The fourth side is the exchange aspect itself as well. So these are now regulated exchanges in Abu Dhabi for the requirements of ensuring that the central limit order book operates, the requirements around settlement, recording of a transaction, how you disclose such products, fair and orderly trading, all those aspects will apply as well. And the final one is in relation to custody and settlement. That's such a vital part of what we're looking for in terms of carbon trading and commodity trading generally as well. We have rules and requirements around how such products must be custodized and ultimately settled and cleared depending on the product as well. Next slide, please. So these are the types of activities, and by establishing such a regime, we can allow for exchanges and various other trading venues, clearinghouses, custodians, and those that will deal and advise and arrange for products as well. All entities in Abu Dhabi that would do these activities, particularly on behalf of clients and others, will now be required to be regulated. And you can see on the right-hand side, we only allow it in the context of commodities that we allow into the jurisdiction. So not every product is allowed to be taken into the market. We will also have oversight of those products as well. Next slide. Now, to do that, I'm sure the question is how are we doing that? And so we've created the concept of accepted spot commodities only. And carbon offsets and other carbon products will be acceptable and appropriate for assessment under this requirement. But into our COBS rule, we require various requirements and standards to be met to allow that product to come into our market. So for each commodity and each carbon product traded, we will look at and make sure there are responsible and sustainable sourcing requirements, adherence to internationally recognised certification standards. We will look at the market fundamentals of the product itself, how it operates, is it fair and orderly, the transparency requirements, and any other factor as relevant and required by us that each firm must put in place. Next slide. Now, in terms of the wider requirements as well, I've already touched on these, but I've talked about responsible and sustainable sourcing. This is a key aspect now. So whether it's gold, if you think of the Kimberley Accord in the gold space, whether it's oil, whether it's any other commodity, physical nature, sorghum, wheat, oil, carbon as well, all those requirements, all those products, are required to make sure they meet our various ISO international standards and the OECD's due diligence guidance for responsible minerals. And that's on there in terms of the hard commodities as well. We have delivery and storage requirements for both firms where they would deliver and store both within Abu Dhabi or regionally or globally. You'll reference some requirements there, port conditions and others as well. That's for obviously the physical delivery of things such as oil and gold and other requirements as well. Importantly, we've put in place controls around audit and control arrangements, and there must be appropriate insurance arrangements as well, and they must be appropriately stored. So the process of verification, the reports, inventory logs, other fees, and how you handle insolvency if there's other issues as well. Next slide. In terms of those delivery arrangements, how you can deliver, if there is failed delivery, how that will work as well, disruption or dispute or underperformance of the delivery of a contract, and requirements around the title to spot commodities if applicable, and also if a exchange, for example, was running an auction platform for various offset products as well, all that is brought into our regime additionally as well. Next slide. Now here's an interesting one. How are we looking at some of these markets? Are they exchanges, and what are we seeing as a regulator? What this slide is saying now is we've brought into our jurisdiction all the market abuse requirements as well. So traditionally, regulators will look at the trading of securities or derivatives and make sure that the exchanges and the regulator has oversight for that as well. What I would tell you is not only is there our oversight of these markets, we can also watch them real time. So every exchange that operates a carbon market or a securities market or derivatives market inside Abu Dhabi sends us a real-time fixed feed where right now my surveillance team is watching every order and every trade in those order books as well. And that's particularly important to ensure stability and transparency and credibility in these markets. Next slide. We also look at all the AML and KYC aspects of all the members and clients that will connect to the markets. This is most important in these areas as well. And I don't think I'm raising anything particularly new here, except to say that what regulators would apply in this space, we're applying to carbon and commodity markets as well. Next slide. One final interesting point, and this is relevant to the types of technologies we're seeing. Some of the exchanges we're seeing, particularly in the carbon space, are utilising blockchain technologies to allow for the trading and settlement of these products. And one of the things that's changed as part of that model is we're seeing different types of access into the exchanges. And traditionally we've seen member-led models, but we're also seeing what we call direct clients. So though in the carbon markets we're allowing professional clients, such client doesn't anymore necessarily need to connect via a member. They can connect straight into the trading system of our exchanges as well. And that's required for the reasons I've raised before, our own real-time trading and surveillance systems and the world-class requirements around AML and onboarding as well. Next slide. System alerts, these are the usual things you'll see. So for the regulators in the room, you'll look at these types of alerts that would apply in a securities or derivatives market. We are applying the same alert logic, the market abuse logic, to carbon markets as well. Next slide. So next steps. What I can confirm to you literally only minutes ago, coincidentally, is our rules and requirements now have been published. So we consulted on these rules going back between March and May of this year. And as of literally in the last 30 minutes. We have now published the requirements relevant to carbon markets, environmental instruments, and spot commodities as well. And this is important leading up to the launch of one of our exchanges in Abu Dhabi, literally over the next few months. We've given principal approval and we're working now towards final approvals for the launch, first of all, of a spot market in carbon markets and environmental instruments, and then moving into derivatives as well. So my team's really excited, as much as regulators can be excited, about these sorts of things as well, but it's certainly keeping us very, very interested, and it's making us work extremely hard. I think that's it for our presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. Very insightful presentation and valuable input for our carbon trading system. Yeah. Just to recap, Simon just shared us about first the ADGM FSRA business and product, and the one that I quote the most is how ADGM FSRA provide a safe and sound market without unnecessary overregulation, and how they add environmental instrument adds their scope regulation, the KYC process, and their next plan to launch investment exchange and clearinghouse for carbon market. Hopefully, both of the expected investment exchange and also clearinghouse will be launching shortly, Simon. And we will still stay tuned for the question and answer and the second part. And after this, from Abu Dhabi, we will move to Leipzig. I would like to invite Mr. Ingmar Ruvekam. Ingmar will share perspective on compliance carbon market in Europe and beyond. Ingmar, 20 minutes. The screen is yours.
Yeah, many thanks for the introduction and good morning from Leipzig, Germany. Good afternoon to Indonesia. Once again, many thanks for having me here. This really is a pleasure. Well, as is introduced, I'm part of EEX, European Energy Exchange, a global commodity exchange. And with my presentation now, I'm trying to, shed some more light on the practical view on carbon trading from an exchange perspective. So with that, I think I'm good to go to start my presentation. Many thanks. If you could switch to the first slide already. Great. So to begin with, I put an overview. You actually see two different maps of the world. The map on the left summarizes different emissions trading schemes in various regions of the world as they are already implemented or currently under consideration for implementation. And on the right-hand side, you see different carbon tax regimes that exist. I don't want to go into full detail here, but the key message I want to get across is that across all regions and continents, emissions trading schemes as well as carbon taxes are being considered for implementation or are already in place. So there's also a strong trend. So right now, about 18% of global emissions are being covered by emissions trading schemes, whereas in 2010, this was only 4%. So this increase is, of course, mainly driven by China, which introduced a national carbon emissions trading scheme in the last year. And also for carbon taxes, they still only, so to say, cover 5% of global emissions, but this share has also tenfold since 2010. So there's really a strong trend towards more and more carbon pricing. And to get a feeling about global compliance carbon markets, so in the last year, the overall trading volume was about $850 billion US. And again, there was a very strong increase compared to 2020, an increase about 164%. And yeah, we shall expect this trend to continue. Next slide, please. Here I wanted to give some general consideration comparing an emissions trading scheme with a carbon tax. So an emissions trading scheme will ensure that emissions will not exceed a level that has been predefined by the regulator. It will also ensure an overall cost-efficient emission reduction, and the allowance price will be a result of supply and demand. For a carbon tax, Well, you might argue it's easier to implement. There may be lower transaction costs for the implementation. This may ensure a desired level of carbon price, and the actual emission reduction, and that's a key difference between the two, then depends on the actual supply and demand. There's no guarantee for a certain emission reduction. Next slide, please. What are the principal design features of an emissions trading scheme? Well, we have to think about the coverage. Which industrial sectors shall be covered? Which greenhouse gases shall be covered? Shall it follow an upstream or a downstream approach? Then we need to think about the overall ambition. What will the cap be? How ambitious will this cap be? How ambitious will a predefined reduction pathway be in terms of a linear reduction in emissions year in year? We need to think about how shall compliance work? When do obligated parties need to submit their certificates? Will there be different vintages of allowances that are offered for trading? If there are separate trading periods, will be banking between these periods be allowed? And how does it work in practical terms? How will the obligated parties surrender their allowances to cover their emissions? We need to think about the allocation. Will the allocation of the certificates be completely free? For example, based on a grandparenting, grandfathering rule, where obligated companies will receive certificates based on their previous year's emission, for example, or will at least a share of emissions be auctioned? Another key element is market access. Will market access be limited to compliance buyers, or will we also allow, for example, financial intermediaries to participate in the market? Is there a secondary market where, after certificates have been auctioned on behalf of the respective state on the primary market, participants will also be allowed to trade the certificates on a secondary market? Will there be a derivatives market which allows participants, obligated companies, to hedge their carbon price exposure? Then there's some more technical question. Is there a registry that can be used for the transfer of allowances and ultimately also for the surrendering of the allowances for the compliance cycle? How do the obligated parties need to verify their emissions? And then also, this now tackles the compliance market. As you know, also voluntary carbon market schemes exist. For some emissions trading scheme, it has been decided that voluntary credits may also be, at least to a partial extent, be used for offsetting. And may there be a linkage with other emissions trading schemes? That's, for example, one feature we see in Europe, a linking between the European emissions trading scheme and the Swiss ETS, for example. Next slide, please. Now, please allow me to introduce the company I work for. So EX Group, again, stands for European Energy Exchange Group. And although the name has European, it has European in its name, we work successful to promote to the level of a global commodity exchange. So we are now the #1 exchange in power trading worldwide. There's more than 800 trading participants from 41 different countries, and we have 19 locations across different regions and continents worldwide. Next slide, please. Here I want to shed some more light on EX experience in carbon markets. So since 2005, we are active in carbon trading. Our main focus still is the European emissions trading scheme, as you know, the biggest and most liquid emissions trading scheme that currently is in place. We started providing auction services for the EU ETS in 2005, and then very soon also started to introduce a secondary market and a derivative market. Last year in Germany, a second ETS that tackles the emissions of the fuel sector has been introduced, and the sale of these allowances is also being conducted by EX on behalf of the German government. Due to Brexit, a separate UK ETS has been formed, and here EX is trying to support the linkage of this emissions trading scheme to the existing EU ETS, and also preparing the launch of products for this UK ETS. Through nodal exchange, which is also part of EX Group, we have an offering of futures and options in North American market, RGGI, and the Western Climate Initiative. Also in New Zealand, in the last year, an auction system has been launched by the New Zealand Exchange in cooperation with EX. And we are now also looking to expand our partnership to China, where we have signed separate MOUs with different Chinese exchanges. And here we mostly focus on the questions of market access, once for European companies to the Chinese market and also vice versa for Chinese companies to the European market. And last but not least, this all tackled now the compliance market. We also started to launch products in the voluntary carbon market sphere. So since June of this year, 4 different voluntary carbon market products, contracts can be traded on nodal exchange as part of EX Group. Next slide, please. So now please allow me to zoom in on the European emissions trading scheme. So this is in place since 2005. And it covers emissions from the domestic aviation sector, industry, and power generation. In total, about 10,000 stationary installations, and it covers about 40% of EU's total greenhouse gases. It covers emissions from all 27 EU member states, plus Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. It's a, well, classic cap and trade system, and it follows a linear reduction pathway, which is predetermined in advance. There's an annual compliance cycle, so the operators must submit their emissions report and surrender the respective number of allowances to cover the previous year's emissions by April 30th, and the permits are allocated to some extent freely based on a grandfathering rule, and to the other extent through auctions conducted on behalf of the respective member states. And one might say, looking at this key figure, the EU ETS can be considered quite a success, as emissions from the installations that are covered by the EU ETS have dropped by 43% since 2005. Next slide, please. What are the products that are being offered for trading at EX? So our main focus is on the primary auctions, where certificates are being auctioned on behalf of the respective European member state. I will share some details on that on one of the next slides. The products include the typical EUA, the European Union allowance, as well as a second allowance that covers emissions from the aviation sector. It's called EUAA. And then there's a secondary market, both spot and derivatives, where again, these 2 different types of certificates can be traded. We have futures and options, and the clearing and settlements of this trade happens through ECC, European Commodity Clearing AG, which is also part of EX Group and our clearinghouse, who then takes care of the financial settlement of these trades, as well as the physical delivery of the respective certificates on T+1, the next trading day. Next slide, please. Here some more details are summarized for the auctions, the primary auctions in the European ETS that are being conducted at EX. So in 2022, more than 600 million EUAs and 4 million EUAAs will be auctioned through EX. There's a common EU auction platform that makes up the vast majority of the certificates that are being auctioned on behalf of the respective EU member states, and also some countries, in this case Germany and Poland, they decided to have their own auctions. So EX also conducts separate auctions for these 2 countries, and they are scheduled regularly on specific weekdays. The auction calendar is always published well in advance, so that participants will know in which auctions how many certificates will be offered for sale, and the auction results are then always published on EX website after the closing of the auction. Next slide, please. Here's one key feature I wanted to highlight is market access. So what are the eligible participants that can actually participate in the primary auction? So, well, firstly and most importantly, we of course have the compliance buyers who need to purchase certificates and surrender them to cover their emissions. But then also market access is allowed for investment firms and credit institutions, business groupings of compliance buyers, and other intermediaries. So in this market, also intermediaries which purchase certificates on behalf of their clients play a specific role. They have to fulfill certain admission requirements. They have to be established within the European Union, except for the compliance buyers, which may be located outside of the EU, but then have commercial business activities within the EU. They need to hold a nominated holding account in the Union registry that is being used for the transfer and surrendering of the certificates, and they need to hold a nominated bank account. Next slide, please. That's probably a very interesting graph now to see some actual prices. So these prices are they are notated in euros, euros per EUA, per emission certificate, which allows for the emission of 1 ton of CO2 equivalent. Just to give you an idea about the range, so €1 roughly corresponds to 14,690 Indonesian rupees, sorry. And as you can see, the price has been quite low and with very little movement for quite a while. So this graph now starts in July 2010, but actually even way before that. If I would have started this graph now in 2005, you would have seen very little prices and very little movement in the beginning. And this probably has been one of the design mistakes, if I may say so, that have been made for the EU ETS in the beginning, that there has been some oversupply in the market, which led to very low emission certificate prices, which then in the end, of course, do not incentivize the obligated companies to invest into more greener technologies. But as you can see, then coming towards the end of 27, at the beginning of 2018, the prices then started to increase, and they actually increased up to a level of a bit below 100 euros per allowance. So this now really is a level that incentivizes a fuel switch in the energy sector, as well as it stimulates investments in the industries into further greener technologies. And since then, prices have been at a very high level. Now, as you know, Europe and Germany especially is facing an energy crisis. So prices since then have again started to decrease to a level of about 65 to 70 euros per ton, as there's now some speculation on further government intervention in the market. Next slide, please. So now, maybe most interestingly for today's seminar, what are the lessons learned, the key messages that we can take away from the European emissions trading scheme? I mean, as mentioned, it was introduced in 2005, and when more and more countries right now are considering the introduction of emissions trading scheme, it may very much make sense to have a look at these lessons learned and drawing upon the experience of these emissions trading schemes that have already been in place for quite a while. Let me please put some disclaimer on this. This is my personal view. This is neither the view of EX as an institution, nor does it reflect a view of further institutions. This is purely my personal view. Most importantly, I've stated that already. Looking at the facts that the emissions for the installations covered by the EU ETS have dropped by 43% since 2005. I would say that's already quite a success story. But again, as discussed on the previous slide, if you look at the price development, especially in the very early stage in 2005 to 2012, there have been very low allowance prices, which then gave compliance buyers a very little incentive to invest in more efficient technologies. A very good feature of the EU ETS, I would argue, has been that very early on a derivative market has also been introduced, which then allowed compliance buyers to hedge their carbon price exposure from a very early stage on. Because this shall always be one feature of an emissions trading scheme, to allow for a cost-efficient emission reduction, and therefore it's a nice feature if we allow the industries that are covered by this ETS to have minimal compliance cost and give them the chance to hedge their carbon pricing exposure. And finally, I would also argue a very important aspect is the question of market access. So it will be a good idea to provide rather easy market access, and this might be a direct access or also an indirect access, as I've mentioned, through intermediaries. Just as simply, this will ensure a certain level of liquidity. That's one of the, well, most or biggest advantages maybe of the EU ETS or today, that it has indeed reached a certain level of liquidity, which then leads to relatively low transaction costs again for the obligated companies. Okay, with that, I concluded my presentation, and I'm very much looking forward to further questions and the discussion now with the audience. Many thanks from my side.
Thank you, Ingmar. Very insightful presentation and very valuable for us. So just to give a brief recap, Ingmar just shared with us about first the EU ETS design and also EX experience in organizing carbon trading, not only under the EU emission trading scheme, but also as a platform globally. And the lesson learned from EU ETS. Thank you. It's very valuable. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard 3 presentations about carbon trading in 3 different markets, which is Indonesia, Abu Dhabi or United Arab Emirates, and European Union. Before we start the Q&A session, I will shortly recap once again what we have heard from our 3 panelists. First, our first presenter was Pak Wahyu Marjaka that shared us about Indonesia's current effort to achieve NDC, including the carbon pricing. This is one of the most important topic today because the way we do business in the future and how Indonesia adopt the carbon pricing is really depend on the Indonesia Ministry of Forestry Regulation. Second presenter, Mr. Simon O'Brien, that share us about Abu Dhabi design of carbon trading development for, I think, for both ETS and also voluntary market. And the third was Mr. Ingmar Ruvekam that share us about EU emission trading system and how EX play a role in the emission trading system in the world. Now we are entering the Q&A session. I once again invite all of the audiences from Zoom to participate via Q&A box. I also invite audience from OJK TV and also YouTube channel to participate through discussion box. Please write your name, institution, your question, and to whom you address your question. But before we read the question from audience, there are so many questions already. Maybe I want to give a bit context here because there's a question from Junaidi Abdillah that mentioned what are the 2 types of carbon trading. Maybe let me take this question. So actually there are 2 types of carbon trading before we continue the discussion. First is emission trading system or cap and trade. So usually the company will be given an allowance in front of the cycle, and after that, in a year long, they must measure and verify their emission, and they can trade their given allowance, and at the end of the year, they check the allowance, whether they have more or less. If you have less, then you must pay for carbon tax. This is the compliance carbon market. And the others, or the second one is voluntary carbon market that usually come from the person or from the company itself that really want to reduce their emission. So they usually come to carbon market and buy some offset credit. Okay, I think that will give a bit of more context for the audiences. And now allow me to start the question from the Ingmar. This is about the ETS because we talking about ETS and also voluntary carbon market. Ingmar, on the lesson learned slide, you mentioned that EU ETS suffer from low allowance price during initial phase. Very little incentive for compliance buyer to invest in more efficient technology. Can you elaborate more why that's happened, and do you have any recommendation to avoid the same mistakes in Indonesia?
Yeah, many thanks for that question. That's a very relevant question, and maybe like from my perspective now, even the most relevant question when I would be asked to give some advice. So I mean, it's not that easy because as an ETS, as I've been trying to explain you, a cap on the emissions is being set from the regulator or from the political institution, and usually these caps would be defined very well in advance. So that's at least what's happening in the European emissions trading schemes, where now a clear emission reduction pathway shall be provided, so that all compliance buyers will know, okay, what will be the share of emissions that they will need to reduce. In the case of the EU ETS, that will be predetermined until 2030, so over a very long investment horizon. And this, I mean, making such a statement with such a long horizon always makes it a bit complicated, because you can never fully anticipate what will happen. And obviously, I mean, the price of an allowance will always be simply determined by supply and demand, as for all other goods in the economy as well, in the free market economy. There can always be some short-term influencing factors on demand, for example, if there's an unanticipated recession, so to say. And that's, for example, what happened in the early phase of the emissions trading scheme in the EU, right? There was a great financial crisis in 2007, 2008. There was a very long recession in the Eurozone. So actually demand was well below the levels that had been anticipated before, when the cap had been determined. And so this makes it quite hard. So maybe one recommendation could be for an early phase new emissions trading scheme might be just to allow for a mechanism that could reduce supply, for example, if there's oversupply in the market. And that is something that has been introduced in the European emissions trading scheme, that it suffered from oversupply in the very early years. And now a mechanism has been introduced that would steer the supply of allowances if there's an oversupply in the market. But then, of course, you need to have a set of fixed rules that, again, provide a clear guidance to investors on when this supply reduction may take place.
Okay, thank you. One of the tools that you mentioned, that we must have some sort of tools that will reduce the supply in case that the supply is very tremendously so many supply there. Thank you, Ingmar. So I would like also to invite Pak Wahyu, still with the same topic. So according to EU, low allowance price wouldn't make the emitters to reduce their emission. They just, quote unquote, pay their carbon tax instead. However, we know that carbon pricing in Indonesia is a new thing, and there will be reluctance from market players about this. How Ministry of Environment and Forestry Republic of Indonesia plan to accommodate this, Pak Wahyu? In one side, we want to not to give a burden for the companies, but on the other side, how to make the mechanism that encourage the company to change their behavior and increase their mitigation plan, not only pay the carbon tax.
Okay, well, thank you, Pak Denny. Yes, I have thinking that maybe we will facing a similarity problem with EU ETS, but we consider that carbon pricing in Indonesia developed not only for the ETS. Actually, there are 4 kinds of carbon pricing will be developed in Indonesia. The first one is carbon trading, included 2 carbon credit and offset. And the second one is a levy. It's taxing, including taxing in very common language. But not only taxing, actually, it also generates some different incomes also to the government. And the third one is result-based payment. And in the starting stage of the Indonesian, we already start actually with the RBP, and we already have the compensation from the multilateral fund regarding our performance on the emission reduction in Indonesia. But this is unknown by the public, actually. It's just run by the government and some stakeholder in the jurisdiction. And the fourth one is this combination, if we have some differences between 1, 2, 3 of mechanism. Yes, of course, the difference between EU ETS and Indonesian and the difference carbon pricing, of course, we will facing a different situation in Indonesia. And right now, I think that public sector, private business, and everything are just waiting the regulation from Indonesia. Of course, we already have the Perpres presidential decree number 98 by years 2021. And in very soon, hopefully we can get the new regulation regarding the implementation of nilai ekonomi karbon or carbon pricing on the ground, and also some of ministerial decree. Of course, the different ministerial decree will make a little bit different situation regarding the how to accommodate the public sector into the different mechanism. For example, for energy, and Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources try to implement a similarity with the EU ETS, for example. But the forest sector totally different with this sector. Of course, this is the situation we're facing, the difference between Indonesia and EU, also maybe Abu Dhabi. This is our common, and how to accommodate is depend on the situation we set up in the specific sectors in Indonesia. Thank you.
Understood, Pak Wahyu. Thank you so much. So, Ministry of Forestry has already prepared several tools, so that it can be used depending on the situation, and hopefully the implementation will be success, Pak.
Thank you, Pak.
And after this, I will move a bit for the voluntary carbon market. There's also a question actually from Pak Andi Setianto from Bakri Plantation to Mr. Simon. It's a bit the same with my question. He asks, does Abu Dhabi government has NDC and significant carbon assets? But in my point of view, maybe I will rewrite the question. So FSRI has expanded the definition of financial instrument to include the environmental instrument, so that all the market players in Abu Dhabi can recognize carbon as a legit instrument. May we know the reason and the driver behind it? Is it to support your NDC, or is it more focused on global voluntary carbon market?
It's a really good question, and thank you for rephrasing it. And it probably makes it a little bit easier for me to talk in that sense, because I'm not a member of the ministry as like some of my panelists are. But a couple of cents, we're trying to support a number of things. And as a regulator, we have a responsibility to give clarity and certainty to the market for those who want to operate in it. So at our level, we won't be at the federal, or at least the Abu Dhabi level, establishing or being involved in the establishment of the NDC. But certainly we're trying to provide a mechanism by which those who want to participate and provide and support such strategic initiatives can do so. So we've been working to make sure that we can allow for, though we won't set or drive the prioritisation of whether it's an ETS or cap and trade market or a spot market or derivative market for that matter. Our responsibility as the regulator is to allow for an instrument that if it was traded, if it was settled, if it was custodised, if it was cleared in our jurisdiction, it's got the legal structure and support and the regulatory oversight to allow for those activities to occur. Now, clearly we have responded to both the government and industry and other stakeholders' push. This wasn't a regulator just designing something because it sounded good. No, there was clear reasons to do so. Now, on the back of we started to first talk publicly around it about a year ago. One of the key parts of this as well, as you may recall, to many of those on the call today, it was COP26 last year in Glasgow in November. It's COP27 in Egypt, November coming up, and it's going to be COP28 in the UAE next year as well. So there obviously was some timing matters. If we're going to have the markets operating and regulated, we really want them to be regulated and tested well before we go and host COP28 next year, for example. A couple of things just to add on that. When we did first design the framework, we realised that we were too focused on the ETS side, and that as a regulator was probably something we were wanting to expand because we didn't want to force the way the markets were developed. So our responsibility was to make sure we really set the framework to make sure the definition of the instrument that could be traded can capture the different types of activities that could operate and the different types of market participants, and we let the market participants come. As I said, expect to launch our voluntary carbon market later this year. We're in the final stages of approval for that. They're going to have participants and clients trading from all around the world to connect into that regulated market as well. But in terms of how that will develop, we'll leave that to the market operator. We're just providing the regulatory coverage for them to do so.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Simon, for your very clear explanation. I will continue. And speaking of voluntary carbon market, I also want to invite all of the panelists to share these stats. Currently, the demand of voluntary carbon market is increasing tremendously. So many companies that declare that they will want to go to net zero, and they ask where to buy the offset. Now, first, for Ingmar first, considering this growth, does EX also want to take a part of the voluntary carbon market business besides the ETS, and how you foresee this in the future?
Yes, for sure. So also from EX and exchange side, we also see the normal potential, the growth potential of the voluntary carbon market for sure. It's still a very early market that will mature over the next years and will develop according to the projections in terms of market size that are out there. So it's very impressive numbers for market growth that are predicted over the next 10 years, for example. As EX, we indeed have already entered the stage of voluntary carbon markets this year through Nodal Exchange was part of our EX group, and they now offer 4 different contracts for trading: a removal contract, a CORSIA contract, the GER contract, and a nature-based contract. And we will of course further monitor how the voluntary carbon market sphere will develop and adjust our product offering or expand it, better said, if we see the demand for that in the market. Yes.
Thank you, Ingmar. And also, Pak Wahyu,
Yes,
same
thank
question.
you, Pak.
Many said that Indonesian is lung for this world with so many potential nature-based solutions. Many already come to us. How you see this?
Okay. Yes, Indonesia, of course, we acknowledge the voluntary carbon market, and we do not want to stop the voluntary carbon market. We have already experienced regarding the voluntary carbon market in Indonesia, actually. Some of the business in the voluntary sector is regarding the voluntary system in the voluntary mechanism in Indonesia. However, in Indonesia as a party, we already committed to the Paris Agreement. We already moved from the Kyoto Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol is a protocol used as a guidance for implementation of voluntary carbon market. And now, start from January 1st, 2021, Indonesia is committed to Paris Agreement. So in this moment, we set up our commitment not only voluntary, we become mandatory. So it means Indonesia, regarding the presidential decree in nilai ekonomi carbon pricing, we set up the situation and the philosophy of this decree actually based on the regulated market that already signed up by the Indonesia as a party to the Paris Agreement. And based on this, we also derive the mandates from the presidential decree to the derivative ministerial level to implement the mandate of the presidential decree based on regulated market. However, we still accommodate the voluntary carbon market until some such kind of period of time that every stakeholder who run the voluntary carbon market in Indonesia or in the international linked to Indonesia should be adjusted to the time period regulated by the presidential decree and ministerial level. So it means we have a time, we still have time, we accommodate all situation based on situation of the voluntary carbon market in Indonesia, and also we also calculate how much supply and demand based on this voluntary system to a regulated market. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Wahyu, for your brief explanation. I will take a question from the audience. This is actually for all the attendees, but I would like Mr. Ingmar to respond it first. So this is an interesting question, Mr. Ingmar. Some say carbon pricing, this from Anonymous, by the way. Some say that carbon pricing in the form of carbon trading will be ineffective due to its complexities, as opposed of simple carbon tax. There will be various opportunities for traders or regulators to game the system. An example, traders do not reporting their actual emission truthfully, or regulators providing excessive free allowance. Carbon unit rising from mitigation project also raise many questions. Example, the carbon unit from bogus project that don't contribute significantly to the environment. So any response about this, and also any takeaway to mitigate such risks?
Yes. So once again, a very good and relevant question, of course. I mean, when it comes to the monitoring and the verifying of the company's emissions, that will always be, I would say, one key feature of a carbon pricing system, regardless. I mean, actually, regardless of whether you aim to introduce an emissions trading scheme or a carbon tax, you need to have some institution that ensures that companies provide an actual and accurate measure of what they have actually emitted. Without that, neither a carbon tax or any emissions trading scheme would work. When it comes to the efficiency, I would always argue that an emissions trading scheme will always be effective in a sense that there will be a predetermined cap, and if that cap is set at an accurate level by the regulators and the political institutions governing the emissions trading scheme, then also the emissions trading scheme will be effective. But of course, it's also a valid point that an emissions trading scheme imposes some kind of complexity on a system where, for example, in our case, compliance parties, they would need to get access to the exchange, or would need to get access to the exchange for participation in the primary market through an intermediary. This always, for example, will involve some kind of KYC procedure. You will need to find a clearing bank to participate, and these, of course, are advantages of carbon tax, which then might be easier to implement from that perspective. But overall, I would argue it always depends on the industrial sectors, on the structure of the companies you aim to regulate. So there's probably no clear answer on that, but this really depends on the company specifics. And it's maybe again also a disclaimer towards the lessons learned from the emissions trading scheme. Of course, the situation will be different for each country, and this is why it requires very careful considerations from the policymakers and the institutions in this respective country, which solution would fit best for the respective country.
Thank you. Ingmar, anything you want to add, maybe Simon or Pak Wahyu, about some say that carbon pricing might not be ineffective.
Yeah, okay, but I just have thinking that this is a pessimistic thinking that I got from the question actually. But in the government level, like ours here, and the Indonesian government set up everything, infrastructure, for example, SR and our national registry system to accommodate all reporting regarding carbon emission reduction for each stakeholder who play the business, for example, private company, they should register to SRN. This is very transparent and accountable system. And after that, every stakeholder should be, to get the SPE, for example, they should be followed by verification and validation. This is an independency, and also this is monitored by international. So if the stakeholder claiming or reporting or some data that is unreal data, of course there someday maybe can be clearance that this is not real, so it is impacted to the private company itself. So on the other hand, Indonesia set up the carbon pricing with the mechanism cap and trade and tax. So we ignoring them right now, until now we ignoring the cap and tax system because in situation we just worry and we protected ignoring the greenwash system if we only consider cap and tax. So if the tax price is very low, for example, every company just they now do mitigation action, but they just buy to pay the tax, and so it means the emission reduction targets cannot be achieved. This is the real problem we're facing here. So the setup regulation in the purpose and also implementation level is based on the cap and trade and tax things. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Pak Wahyu. Maybe a bit following up question, Pak Wahyu. There also a question from Ibu Debbie Renata. Maybe still. What you mentioned that there should be data in the SRN, and she asked about will there be any opportunity for private sector to trade carbon credits, Indonesia carbon credits particularly, outside the government system or SRN, and can they still use the current standard like CDM, FERA, or gold standard? I think that's the question.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. Actually, we facing many times the same question with us. To this question, actually, can be used for voluntary market. I mean, yes, as I said before, that we implemented regulated markets, so we still have time to adjust it. Outside of the NDC to bring into system that we accommodated the SRN. So everybody should be, this is a mandatory to register to SRN. After that, we can accommodate the situation. You can bring this SPE, for example, to trade domestic or internationally after get authorization from the government. And this is everything regarding the emission reduction should be registered mandatory to SRN system. Without that, after some period of time, if not registered to SRN, of course, they disclaim that there cannot be traded in the domestic market in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Wahyu. Maybe I will raise one more question from the audience. Maybe to Mr. Simon. Do you expect any individual like us, not only the corporation, to buy carbon credits? How you foresee this, Mr. Simon?
At the moment, our markets are professional client only, so they may be an individual, but it's professional only. What we are seeing in practice, though, is most of the firms, or most of the clients that are connecting to the market are corporates, participants in various industries, or financial services firms anyway. So that's an area we're going to watch, but for now it's professional client only, and the focus predominantly is corporates and particularly financial services firms. Where they're coming from, though, obviously regionally, we've also got a lot of interest out of the UK, Europe, through Africa, parts of Asia as well.
Okay. This is one of the technical questions. Still a question from Pranbari Murti. I don't know, maybe Ingmar and also Simon can help. The question is quite unique. Yeah. Can the value of carbon credit face a risk of impairment? For example, that the respective associated underlying project is facing issues or a natural disaster or else. So maybe after the certification done, I don't know, there's a hurricane or something that destroyed the forest, and how that implicate the carbon credit. Ingmar, maybe you want to take the question?
I'm sorry, I must admit I have not fully gotten the question. Can I read it here from the chat? Is it possible?
Yeah. Is there any condition that, for example, the carbon credit face an impairment, so that after we issued the certificate, and after that, I don't know, there's a hurricane or something like that in the forest and destroy the forest, but the carbon credit itself has already been issued? Is there any, something like that will happen and also impair the carbon credit?
I must admit, honestly, I cannot answer that.
Okay.
Maybe some of the other panelists can, but honestly, I cannot.
So I would change it slightly. We wouldn't necessarily see it as an issue of impairment of value of the asset, but having that asset regulated is required then for the market to determine it. A lot of what we've discussed today is how we allow markets to determine pricing. Our responsibility is making sure by having a regulated exchange that connects to the appropriate warehouses and those who are providing the offsets or the product in the first place. So leaving aside the specifics of the question, if there was an issue around a certain vintage of a product or a certain requirement, or as you say, there was a tornado or a flooding, then we would expect to see the valuations of the pricing of those products within the market would certainly have to change. If there wasn't, then we would have concerns around whether it's fair and orderly and transparent in terms of how it operates.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Maybe this is the last question. I will address it to Simon and Ingmar. This is a very, very technical question. I don't know, maybe from the exchange ask this. Yeah. How does the surveillance system in your market for the carbon trading, is it the same with your current surveillance system in the equity or the commodity market? Or you have a new surveillance system to ensure that the trading will do the properly?
I'll start that and then you can follow if you want. From our side, yes, what we did is we built a surveillance system a number of years ago that can take in surveillance feeds and trading and order and transaction data on a real-time basis as well as end-of-day basis for multiple products. So right now, I have a team that's watching commodity derivative markets, watching crypto markets, that's a topic for another day. They can also watch securities markets, and I will watch the environmental instrument markets as well. The firm, we have a dedicated surveillance feed, and we send out the fixed specifications to each of our firms. So all the data comes in on a standardized basis across all our markets. So the answer is yes, we've built it, and we would not launch the regime without that feed coming in. To be clear, that's in addition to what the firm must do as well. But we also take that extra step as the regulator to take in the feeds, and we are the only body responsible that can take action for breaches of market abuse. So we are the enforcement agency that takes and monitors those feeds and will take action against any breaches of the law under that as well.
Thank you, Simon. And how about you, Ingmar? Same or?
There's actually not too much to add from my side. So the answer would be the same from your European perspective.
Thank you, Ingmar. Okay, as much as I want to read all the questions because there are still so many questions today, but the time is very limited. I think that's all for today. Thank you very much for your active participation. And we are apologize that we cannot answer all the attendees' questions. Before we end today's event, I want to invite all the panelists to give a short closing remarks to all the audience. First, I will change the order. So I would like to invite Ingmar first. Please share your closing remark, 1 or 2 minutes.
Yes, sure. So if I now being asked to summarize my presentation, maybe in 1 or 2 sentences, I would say it makes sense for the world as further emissions trading schemes and carbon taxes are being developed around the world. It will make sense to look at the already existing experiences of those systems that have been in place for quite a while. It makes a lot of sense to look at what has gone well, but even more sense to have a look at what didn't go so well and to learn from that, to draw inferences upon that. But ultimately, I mean, every case and every country will be specific for a large number of reasons. So it will not be possible to transfer the lessons learned from one scheme to all other countries, but it always needs to be somehow a specific solution. But still, it will make sense to draw upon the experiences from the yet existing schemes and taxes.
Thank you, Ingmar. And second, Simon, please share your closing remarks, 1 or 2 minutes.
I won't go too long. I just want to thank everybody for their time today. I think it's reflective of and the questions today, if you go through the chat, Wow, what some wonderful questions to really get to the heart of what we're trying to deal with here, both nationally, regionally and globally. And I hope our presentations collectively have further informed the discussion. If there is any reason to follow up with us to understand what we're trying to do here, and we're certainly going to learn what's going on around the world. So really from us, it's just to thank you, and thank you for inviting to us. It's been a real pleasure today. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Last but not least, Pak Wahyu, please Pak, 1 or 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Thank you, Pak Denny. Yes, thank you very much for attendance, participation, and active question to us here. We already have a very good moment to share together our progress regarding to carbon pricing. Start from now, in a few weeks later, we will start carbon pricing in the different situation in Indonesia. Maybe it's different with the EU or others part of the global our country. But we understand this is a not so easy step to realize the benefit and to achieve. The first one is an energy target. The second one is give the benefit more to private and public in which we push the situation to sustainable situation or sustainable development in Indonesia. Of course, we need to support. We need support from many stakeholders in Indonesia. So that's why we accommodate all suggestions, questions, everything to us, to the government, and we will start together to get a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Wahyu. So that's conclude our discussion today. I will once again say thank you to Pak Wahyu, Mr. Simon, and Mr. Ingmar for your time and information that have been shared with us this afternoon. I would like to invite our audience for virtual applause our panelists. So, as a closing remarks, thank you everyone for attending and participating in this seminar. What we have learned today that climate action failure is the most severe risk on global scale. And to combat that, we need all participation from everyone in every role we can do to reach the net zero by 2050. So please always consider your carbon footprint on your businesses and activities and allocate your investment towards low carbon economy. Carbon market in Indonesia is on progress and really near to us, and let us become a part of the net zero and went through this journey together. Thank you and stay healthy. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Back to you, Yolanda.
Ladies and gentlemen, please kindly fill in the survey and download today's webinar presentation with the link that is shown on the screen. Bapak Ibu hadirin sekalian, mohon untuk dapat mengisi survei pada link yang muncul pada layar Bapak Ibu, dan link materi akan diberikan kepada peserta yang telah mengisi survei tersebut. Kami persilakan untuk langsung menuju kepada tautan yang diberikan atau langsung meng-scan QR yang ditujukan pada layar Bapak Ibu sekalian. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of today's event, International Seminar, Carbon Trading, The Journey to Net Zero. We would like to thank the presence of all officers in ministry and state institutions, speakers, as well as all participants that have come to this event. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good day and keep moving forward with Indonesia Capital Market.